everyone, and welcome to this sort of impromptu, commentary track to go alongside, or at least afterwards, of my latest true crime video. They say that a masterpiece is never completed, only abandoned. And so, as with most things that I end up creating in life afterwards, I think more about what I did and how I might have made it better. And so I've had those thoughts over the last day or two since posting my recent true crime video. So, for those of you that might or might not be interested, here are some extra thoughts on that whole process. First and foremost, I've had a couple of people ask me offline why I chose that case in particular. And I had a list of different cases that I was thinking about. Okay, well, if I'm going to try another true crime video, because I've gotten such a great response on the first one, I felt encouraged to do so. What shall I do next? And I made a list of cases that I thought were interesting or cases that I remembered from the past that I didn't recall either anyone had or had much covered before. There are a couple of considerations I've now gained when thinking about these things, since I'm so relatively new to it. First and foremost, is it a case that is already ridiculously well known and well covered? If it is, then I probably don't have anything interesting to say about it. Like, you're never going to see me do a video on Chris Watts, particularly. I mean, I did a little live stream at the time talking about the case, but an actual breakdown of it, no, it's been done to death. No pun intended. And so many other cases. So that's the first thing. Is it something that's all over the place and well known? And if it is, probably not. The second consideration is, at least in this particular genre, the Jim Can't Swim genre, is there any interrogation footage available? Now, in my mind, that's not necessarily a requirement, but it is something to consider first. Or if not interrogation footage, is there enough supplemental media to the case to add to the presentation? In my first video, I was fortunate in that the Ralph Shorty situation had footage of him before the crime, literally during the point at which he was discovered committing the crime, and then the interrogation footage afterwards. So he's had sort of a natural 3-act play already sort of sitting there to sort of drape narration around in telling that story. If I have a case where that isn't present, like the case is older than the internet per se, or that information isn't made available publicly, will I still do that case? I wasn't sure because I couldn't seem to find anything that I was familiar with that had information available to the public. So I just sort of, on a lark, I went on YouTube, as you're wont to do, and I typed in interrogation footage and just sorted by oldest to newest to see if I could find a case that was available, at least footage-wise, but was not something that had just happened. And one of the oldest available pieces of interrogation footage that I came across initially was the Pierre Carey case. And I'd never heard of it, no idea. So I watched some of the interrogation footage. And if you end up watching the raw interrogation footage, I gave everybody a sample of it with the first little bit you see in my video. It's an hour and 20 minutes or so of that kind of pace, where you have the detective asking something in pieces and it being translated to Carey. Carey gives his response. The translator talks in some clarification, then responds to the detective, and in some cases has to go back to Carey for clarification. It's a game of telephone that is almost no fun to watch. It is not very compelling television, so to speak. That's why I did so much cutting and trimming to make the future portions of that interrogation more legible, so to speak. There are some interrogations that almost need no commentary whatsoever, like Stephanie Lazarus or Russell Williams. Maybe you need a little bit of context for Stephanie Lazarus, but for the most part, you don't. You could just listen to that and get basically all the information you need. Russell Williams, boy, that plays out like a 2-man play. If you've ever watched the Russell Williams interrogation footage, that's something else. And Jim Smith, the interrogator in that case, tour de force in interrogation. So I'll give a plug for that. So anyway, but I watched the interrogation footage and I didn't find it all that compelling by itself. Like I say, it wasn't like watching a drama unfold like so many other good interrogations can be. But I was still curious about the case because I'd never heard of it before and I didn't know the details. So one of the first stories I looked up had, and I think a link to whatever story that was is in the description of the video. It mentioned how the victim was invisible, mainly due to the fact that the children had not submitted any photos of her to the prosecution. And that stuck in my brain, because as the more I read about the case, what little information there was about Ranjita Carey's life prior to her death was very thin. But the stuff that I did see or did learn, the fact that the kids didn't bother giving any photographs over, it just kind of didn't click. And I don't know that I got this across clearly enough in the video. Like I say, hindsight being 2020. So in case this matters, here's sort of the confusion or the bewilderment I was trying to get across more so than anything else. You had a lady who, for all we know, as far as we can tell, spent decades upon decades in an entirely abusive relationship, going from Afghanistan to India and then to Canada before she was eventually murdered. And throughout this entire thing, she's raising 6 children under probably some of the most ridiculously stringent and abusive circumstances you could imagine, not only from what was coming from her husband, but also just sort of the general economic circumstances and societal circumstances that they were in between Afghanistan, India, and then on to Canada. But these 6 children, they all survived. They all thrived. They're all, as far as I know, alive and, with families of their own or lives of their own now in Canada and elsewise. And when she got to Canada, what was one of the things that she did? Well, she encouraged her children to take advantage of the new freedoms and resources available to them in Canada that they did not have access to back in India and certainly not back in Afghanistan. She was doing what a good mother would do, trying to sort of shepherd her children towards a better outcome in life than she herself experienced. Right? I mean, that's sort of what parents ideally are, meant to do for their children. And she attempted to do that for herself as well. Right? She attempted, in a very sad way, to try to release herself from her anguish through an overdose. But also around that same time, she was reaching out for help from the Afghan Women's Organization to try to get help to transition away from her husband and live a life of her own. And she did all of this under the cloud of Pierre Carey and whatever he had been doing to her for all those decades. And like I mentioned in the video, by the time that she had died, the descriptions of her actual physical state, aside from, how she was killed, she was almost 54, like 3 days off of her 54th birthday at the time that she died. And yet there are descriptions of her, at least physicality speaking, where it looks like, or it sounds like, she was 20 or plus years older looking just because of the life that she led or been forced to lead. And that she only weighed 86 pounds, a grown woman, 86 pounds. And so when I read all of that information about her, and I read about how much, she must have sacrificed and how she struggled and how she strained, not only for her children, but then for herself, but then to have her children not even submit images of her to the court for the sake of consideration of her life that had been taken. And that just blew my mind. I mean, let's pretend for a second. And, maybe I'm not pretending. Maybe this is the case because I can't read minds. But let's say for a second that you are the child of a man who has murdered your mother. Okay. And you honestly believe that your father did it not maliciously. Okay. He was out of his mind, or he had some kind of defect. And this isn't a reflection of him as a person. This was just some lightning from the sky sort of thing, and you forgive your father. I mean, such things are not unheard of, correct? Okay. Why then would you at the same time feel as though your mother does not deserve some kind of remembrance? Even if your father didn't do it on purpose, your mother should just be what, forgotten, or her life just sort of like washed aside, that the prevalence of your father should be raised up and your mother sort of suppressed, that she wasn't killed, she simply passed away. These things just, like I say, they just kind of stuck in my brain, and it didn't make any sense as I was doing research on this story. And so that's really where the whole the title of the video and the whole sort of framing around it, the second death, came from. Is there was a conscious effort made by her own children to retract her presence from the world in a way additional to simply, quote unquote, simply her being murdered. I mean, let's be honest, if we can for a moment. 99.9% of us on the planet, as with all of human history, we're not going to be remembered very far after our dying, right? The people who knew us, maybe some paper records and so on. But at a certain point, just like with so many other things, memory of each of us is going to eventually fade out. And that's just nature. That's just, that's just life, so to speak. A very, very, very small percentage of us will either do things or be involved in things that will carry a notion of ourselves and memories of ourselves forward beyond, say, 25, 50 years after we passed away, right? And this, there's also considerations for, how many children or grandchildren you have and so on. But more or less, the significance of each of our individual lives is going to eventually fade away from memory and from relevance, let's say. I'm not trying to be depressing here. I'm just, sort of being realistic. And so the natural state of that progression from life and existence and relevance to eventually fading away, like I say, that's a natural process, just like life itself, just like natural death itself. And so the idea that someone would take steps immediately after someone's death, effectively, to further remove them from memory, to further remove them from relevance in life, even if it's just as, quote unquote, simple as not sending over any photographs to the prosecution. That, like I say, that just caught in my brain, and it just seemed like it seemed like a cruelty upon cruelty in a way. Now, I do not know the minds of the children. I do not know what their motivations were. All I can say is that from the outside, it seems pretty lame of a thing to do. And so I did my best not to make too many judgments about such motivations in there. I can only, say what I can say from what's available on the public record. But it seemed to me like a very cold, cold thing to do to someone who not only was trying to better themselves, but ultimately was trying to better the lives of her own children in the process. And to just be sort of, tossed aside like that, just really stuck with me. So anyway, that's sort of the whys and the wherefores of why I chose the case, and some extra thoughts on why it stuck with me and why I decided to work on it. It's this has been a very weird experience so far, trying to do narrative videos in specific, but true crime videos as well. Um, I'm still new to it. I don't know if I'm any good at it. And that's, in large part my own sense of, self-doubt talking. I'm very, very appreciative of the positive comments and encouragements I've been getting from people. I don't know if I'll make this a regular thing, like I'll do one of these a month or something, because I tell you what, I have had to learn to pace myself. I think I mentioned this previously on a couple of other streams. My pace of production for my channel since its inception overall has been, I get an idea, I write a script, I put it together, I assemble it, I edit it, and I get it out there within 24 to 48 hours. It's a really quick turnaround. And admittedly, commentary videos are not a lot of heavy lifting in that regard, save for, how you do it and if you have something to say about it. And so transitioning from that mindset to something where it's like, okay, I have to do this methodically. I have to write a script. I then have to work the script. I'm going to try to record about 3 paragraphs worth of script a day and merge that into the video project makeup and just take my time. Don't rush it. Take it easy. I have to learn how to do that because the instinct to want to get it out there and have that instant gratification, not only of, sort of producing something, creating something, but also having it get off my mind. Because, when I'm doing something like this, I'm constantly thinking about it. Like, how would I tell this part of the story? Or what imagery could I use to sort of exemplify this? And then where would I put this? All those kind of thoughts are just racing in my head all the time when I'm doing a project like this. And there is a desire to get past that. But at the same time, I don't want to just rush it out the door and then on reflection go like, oh man, I should have done this. I should have done that. But I also have to admit that's always going to happen. If I had taken 2 months to make this thing rather than like a month or whatever, I'd still have on reflection things I wish I'd done or things I wish I changed or that kind of deal. So it is a learning process. And speaking of a learning process, thank you, In Human Form. For those of you who are not aware, In Human Form, or Formy as I like to call him, has his own YouTube channel of both crime analysis and social criticism and psychology, as you can see there in the tag. And I made sure at the end of this latest video to thank In Human Form, because early on as I was starting to do this, I wasn't sure how best to present my framing device, so to speak. In the first version of the script, I had the last segment essentially as the first part. I started out by describing what is the second death in my mind. And I was so like, okay, do I start with this or do I end with this? In my first true crime video, the script started with listing off 3, abstracts, notions about people or values. Do I repeat that for this? Is that going to become my thing? Do I want to do that, et cetera? And so someone who has far more experience in essay writing, and as far as I'm concerned, far more skill at creating documentary and narrative videos. And I'm fortunate to be able to talk with Formy offline. I solicited him for some advice, and it was one of those things where I just need somebody else to tell me that I'm safe in trying this kind of thing. Not to diminish his contribution, but it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not sure. I need a second opinion. And he gave it to me, thankfully. You could, boy, oh boy, you could frame that a couple of ways. And I'm very appreciative of that. So anyway, if you have not checked out his channel, by all means, check out his channel. He is amongst the best of the Jim personators in the genre that Jim Can't Swim has effectively created. So start with his first video and work forward, and I think you will enjoy as you go. And also, hi for me. But yeah, that's basically all I wanted to add in case anybody was curious about this case, because it is an obscure case, and that's one of the things that a couple of people commented on my first true crime video. Not many, but a couple, and said, this Ralph Shorty case, this is so well known. Do something that's more obscure. And I was like, is there anything that's obscure that also has interrogation footage that somebody hasn't already tried to Jim Can't Swim at this point? And, so either way, it turned out to be an interesting story, a very, very sad story when taken all into context. I don't know. I haven't gotten to the point where I either feel comfortable giving a whole lot of sort of analysis of meaning or anything else beyond just the facts, ma'am, kind of Joe Friday reporting on the thing. Except for obviously my framing device, because that's really what took hold of my mind. Sort of additionally taking someone out of the world after they'd already been brutalized like that. Yeah. Anyway, I could say more, but I'll just end up repeating myself. I'll go to the chat real quick for a few hellos, and then I'll wrap this up. Fun time bats. Folkdefino. Hope I got that right. Angela Ariaga, Robert Pincus, Jordan Herbert, Mike Savage, Blarg, Kanan Crystal, Wing, The Magister, Iconodule. Let's see. Dagger 3K, John Miller. Did I say Jamie Melquist? If I didn't say Jamie Melquist, hello, Jamie Melquist. Catherine H. Jaeger Pony, Spittle Buggies, Emperor W.R. Costin. Let's see. A couple months real quick. Perhaps they thought it was more respectful to remember to keep her image private. I wager they testified for their father in fear he would get out at some point. Like I say, I guess that is a possibility, but at the same time, it just seemed so. Yeah, maybe I was misplaced in passing judgment on motivation. I'll concede to that. I can't know why the children decided to do that. Obviously, I can't know it. But the ultimate result of it is that, like I said in the video, all the jury ended up seeing were the images of the woman in the worst possible state she could be, and no notion of what she was like or what kind of person she was in life, which I thought, yeah. So it's entirely possible that I have made a mistake of judgment or interpreting their actions. But I think the ultimate result, as far as I'm concerned, just compounds what happened to that lady, and the fact that, as I say in there, all we know of his first wife and what happened to her is based on his changing narratives. And so this loss of presence, this loss of relevance or identity in life after death, but being done as a deliberate act in one way, shape, or form by another person. Yeah, that's, so even if my interpretation of the why is off, which is entirely possible, I think the end result of quote unquote the second death in that way is still something worth talking about. But let's see, one more here from Kanan Crystal Wing. I was thinking the children didn't give it in thinking it might damn the father, the daughters at least. The sons looked like they didn't want anything to do with the case, but I don't know. Yeah, like I said, there's a whole bunch of different ways you could look at it, and the family, they're not required to give their explanations or anything, and so it's just left to observers to, well, observe. So anyway, there you go. Anybody who was curious, a little extra supplementary information on the video and my thoughts on it. If you have any extra thoughts on the video or the story, by all means, leave a comment, or leave a comment on the actual video itself, because there's lots of conversations that take place on there, and it's really neat to see. And if you'd like to see more from me, well, you can find me Thursday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern on this channel for the next episode of TED Excellence, where my energy level and overall mood will be much different than a true crime video, as I look at a off-brand TED Talk for your entertainment and or, proverbial aneurysm. But with that, everyone, hope you all have a good rest of your day. I hope you're all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.